I'll do it. The voice came from behind Jinwoo. The hunter's eyes turned toward the raid leader who had spoken. Mr. Song, you're going to bow before that goddamn statue. As the hunters spoke out in confusion, Mr. Song turned and met Jinwoo's eyes. What have you discovered? Jinwoo shook his head. Just a gut feeling. Yes, for now. I see. Jinwoo's instincts resulted in 11 of them being still alive. Well, 10 after Mr. Ju's death. As such, was it not worth it to try and put some faith in him? This was what Mr. Song believed. As the raid leader bowed before the statue of God, the mood in the air became somber. You're really going to do it? Taking advantage of the opportunity Mr. Song had provided, Jinwoo spoke up. Please, bow before the statue of God. This might be our only way to leave here alive. Alive? To leave here alive? That phrase reached the other's ears with a great weight. Leave here alive. We can get out of here, just by bowing before that thing. One by one, the hesitant hunters started bowing before the statue, imitating a scene of worship. Eventually, even the angry Mr. Kim also took his place bowing before the statue. However, there was no response from the statue of God. Its two eyes still glowed with the terrifying crimson light. Jinwoo felt his heart sinking to his stomach. Was I wrong? And his gaze turned to Juhee at his side. Lying completely prone on the ground with her hands covering her head, it was hard to say that she was in a position of bowing before the statue. Jinwoo gently grabbed Juhee's wrists. Startled, Juhee looked up at him like a terrified prey. He wordlessly nodded at her, then released his hand. Slowly, Jinwoo helped Juhee assume the position of worship before the statue of God. This should do it. And then there was one. Himself. Jinwoo faced the statue, kneeling, then put his hands on the ground and slowly bowed his head. And a change occurred. The hunters who noticed started making noise. The statue of God. Everyone, look at the statue of God. Its eyes. The crimson light that adorned the statue's eyes were fading away. What? You mean this really is working? And just like that, the lights completely disappeared from the statue's eyes. The hunters cheered in unison. The light disappeared. We're alive. The excited hunters rose from their spots and cheered. But the statue of God did not react. Jinwoo, who followed suit, sighed with relief. Phew, as he had guessed, this room was operating accordingly to a set of rules and conditions, just like a game. If that's true, the game was not over yet. There were 2 more commandments. Second, praise the Lord. Third, prove your faith. Suddenly, with a deep rumbling, the entire room started to shake. Jinwoo's expression hardened. As I thought, his guesses were correct. This was not over. The statue of God's enormous body was slowly rising from its seat. The hunters who were celebrating together with tears of joy froze. What? Wasn't it all over? No, it can't be. Frozen in fear, the hunters could not say much more. Their faces were filled with terror and despair. No. The statue of God assumed a standing position. It looked around, taking in the surrounding, then started walking towards the hunters. Boom. With each step it took, the statue of God shook the earth. Boom. Its massive figure was such that its head almost reached the ceiling. Boom. As its sheer size put pressure on the hunters, it slowly closed the gap between it and them. Hey, Mr. Sung. Mr. Sung Jinwoo. What should we do? The hunters who were cursing Jinwoo only moments ago now looked towards him for hope. Is there anything else we have to do? Say something. Even as grown adults, the hunters' faces were on the verge of breaking down in tears. Yet they looked at Jinwoo as their only remaining hope. Jinwoo carefully helped Juhee, frozen in fear, to her feet, and he explained the second commandment. It said, praise the Lord, that's our clue. That's. Mr. Kim spoke knowingly. It was written on the tablet, right. That's right, praise the Lord, prove your faith, we have to fulfill all 3 commandments. Jinwoo's words were filled with urgency. Boom. With one last step, the statue of God had already arrived before their group. Its massive shadows covered the hunters, whose faces became pale. I'll try. One of the hunters, normally a shy, youthful man, stepped forward. Hey, what are you going to try? I'm part of my church's choir. If it's praise, I'm confident in it. The young man answered Mr. Kim and walked towards the statue of God. As he neared the statue, he took a deep breath and started singing. As I walked to the Lord, his youthful voice rang throughout the room. Please renew me and provide me with your blessing. The statue of God stopped before him. The hunters gasped in surprise and awe. As if it was satisfied by the song, the statue of God stood motionless. All other sounds of the room disappeared. Only the youth's voice was heard in the room. Gaining courage from the apparent result, the hunter strengthened his voice and continued to sing. All my weaknesses will be washed away by the grace of my Lord. Amidst the hopeful hunters, Jinwoo could not shake the feeling of uneasiness, the feeling that they were missing something. No, this is all wrong. He kept repeating the thought to himself. This room had its own set of rules. Right now, the youthful hunter was following the rule of Christianity, not this room. But thankfully, the statue of God was not moving. Maybe this was enough to satisfy the conditions. Jinwoo tilted his head. The reason why he had not stopped the singing was because he could not think of any other way to stop the statue of God. Suddenly, boom, a loud crash broke through the singing, followed by a scream. As the statue of God raised its foot again, the mangled remains of the singing hunter fell from its soul. The other hunters started screaming as well. The previously emotionless face of the statue of God was now filled with an incredible rage. It's angry. Run. The hunters quickly ran away from the statue, having lost all thought and reason after seeing the youthful man be crushed beneath the statue of God's foot. A female hunter simply stood in place and screamed, "Shit!" Jinwoo, who was running with Juhee in his arms, quickly turned to try and help her, but he was blocked by Mr. Song. Obviously, it's too late. Like swatting a fly, the statue of God slammed its hand on top of the female hunter. Bang! Jinwoo turned away. It was a gruesome scene which he could not bear to witness. We can't dilly-dally here. Are you trying to get that young lady killed as well? At Mr. Song's rebuke, Jinwoo snapped back to attention. Mr. Song was right. Boom, boom, boom. The statue of God ran from hunter to hunter, crushing them beneath his feet. With each step, he shook the entire temple. Boom, boom. Jinwoo ran with his teeth clenched. With her eyes closed, Juhee held on to Jinwoo as they ran. Let's split apart. Okay. Knowing that running together made them a better target, Jinwoo and Mr. Song separated away from each other. Trying to maintain the largest distance between himself and the statue of God, Jinwoo ran towards a spot at the walls. He saw that Mr. Park was already there, having ran with all his might, knowing there was more on the line to him than just his own life. The image of his family reflected over his teary eyes. His son, who looked just like his father. His wife, with his second child. Mr. Park could not afford to die in a place like this. Pulling forth every ounce of his strength, Mr. Park was able to reach the walls faster than the other hunters. Huff, huff. Suddenly, Mr. Kim, who was friends with the man, shouted at the panting Mr. Park. Mr. Park. At the familiar voice, Mr. Park turned towards Mr. Kim. Come. Mr. Kim gestured towards Mr. Park's back and yelled. Turn around. And something sharp flashed from behind Mr. Park. Slash. Mr. Park was split cleanly from the top of his head to the base of his crotch. The evenly separated sides of his body fell in different directions onto the ground. Mr. Park. The statue that had cleaved Mr. Park in twain with its sword simply returned and assumed its position on the walls, as if nothing had happened. Mr. Kim held back tears as he witnessed the death of his friend. These fucking pieces of... Boom, boom, boom. Behind him, the giant statue of God was going from hunter to hunter, crushing them with his feet. Those that fled to the walls were attacked by the statues. My arm. The interior of the temple had turned into a scene of terror and carnage. Jinwoo panted wildly as he ran, his forehead dripping with cold sweat, his legs getting heavier and heavier, his breath getting shallower and shallower. But his head was filled with a single thought, repeated over and over again. Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. The second commandment that swam through his head. The key to solving the meaning of the commandments must be hidden in this room. There must be something in here that we're supposed to use. But when the hunters initially entered the temple and looked around, they found no tools or mechanisms. The only thing here are those damned statues. Wait, a thought appeared in Jinwoo's head. The only thing that's here are those statues. Jinwoo's eyes widened. Why didn't I think of that? If the statues were the only thing in this room, then the statues must be the key to solving the mystery. The statues only moved when someone entered their proximity. This must have been the key to using them somehow. If that's correct, gathering what energy he had left, Jinwoo screamed through his panting breath. Everyone, head to the statues with instruments. Jinwoo's shout reached all the hunters' ears. Instruments. Hope returned to their eyes. Unlike the time where Jinwoo asked them to bow, the hunters this time did not hesitate to respond. Of course, if Jinwoo was wrong on his guess, they would be massacred when they approached the statues. But in this moment, there was not one hunter who remained suspicious of Jinwoo's directions. Mr. Song was the first to arrive at a statue holding an instrument. Holding his breath, Mr. Song slowly looked up at the statue. As if responding, the statue's fingers moved, and it started playing the harp in its hands. It was a beautiful sound. He was right. Moved to the statues with instruments. Each hunter, with renewed hope, ran towards the various statues holding instruments. Trumpets, flutes, lyres. Soon, the harmonious melody of different instruments filled the entire temple. Mr. Kim, who had been running until his breath ran out, collapsed and knelt before a statue holding a mandolin. Strum strum. As the mandolin's melody rang through the air, the statue of God that was chasing Mr. Kim slowed to a stop. Unable to hold his emotions back, Mr. Kim burst into tears where he knelt. And the statue of God turned away from him. Scanning the rest of the temple, it found its new target. Shit. Meeting its eyes, Jinwoo cursed. And he started running, his heart beating like it was about to explode. His sweating back was soaked. Why is this one not playing? Jinwoo glared at the statue he had arrived at with resentment. Holding drums in its hands, its silent figure made no indication that it would play its instrument. Boom, boom, boom. With terrifying speed, the statue of God closed the gap between them. As the statue, which had been at the opposite end of the room only moments ago, neared them, Jinwoo gulped. Is it because Juhee and I are both here at the same time? That must have been the answer. As he looked around, no other hunter had trouble with their statues. I don't have time to think about this. He put down Juhee and prepared to run to a different spot. Jinwoo. A terrified Juhee held onto his sleeves. Jinwoo calmly whispered into her ears. We'll both die if I stay. As he saw tears forming at the corners of her eyes, Jinwoo knew that there was no time to explain. He gently pulled away her shaking hands from his sleeves, then ran with all his might towards another statue. Ba-bum ba-bum ba-bum. He heard the beat of the drum starting from behind him as he ran. Thank God. There was only one thing left. To safely make it to another statue. Jinwoo was now the only one who had not made it to the protection of statues holding instruments. Accordingly, the complete rage of the statue of God was now focused solely on him. Jinwoo ran away from the crashing footsteps of his chaser and sped across the room. Boom, boom. As he barely dodged and rolled away from the statue's stomps, his panting became heavier and heavier. Although he was the lowest of the E-rank hunters, as a fighter-class hunter, his body offered what little help it could in this situation. Just a little bit more. Taking notice of the statue of God's footsteps closing in on him, he focused and strengthened his legs. His speed increased. There was but a few steps until he reached his target statue. No, not that way. Mr. Song had shouted at him. Having focused on the statue of God's movements until now, Jinwoo turned his attention to the statue he had arrived at. It's not holding an instrument. He now realized what appeared to be an instrument in the statue's hands was actually a shield. Without mercy, the statue raised and brought down the shield in its hands. Jinwoo threw his body to the side. Juhee screamed. As he rolled across on the floor, he looked up. The statue of God was almost upon him. Out of the frying pan, his tumble on the ground had opened a cut on his forehead. Blood flowed down to his eyes, obscuring his vision. Jinwoo rapidly looked left and right. Instrument, instrument. But no instrument registered in his eyes. The statue of God raised its foot. Shit. Boom. Jinwoo barely evaded the stomp by throwing his body to the side. But he was reaching his limits. Feeling faint, he found it hard to maintain balance for some reason. Please, if there was a god, he wanted to pray to it. In that moment, Jinwoo noticed a statue that was neither holding a weapon nor an instrument. He crawled with last vestiges of his strength, placing his hopes on the statue. With a final twist of his body, he threw himself at the feet of the statue with a book in its hands. Facing the statue of God that was heading toward him, he realized he had no strength left to move. Panting heavily, he looked at the face of the statue of God. As if made worse by his persistent resistance, the anger in the face that looked down upon Jinwoo was greatly magnified. It stopped before Jinwoo. Faced with a giant as tall as a building, Jinwoo struggled to breathe. Guess I'm a cornered rat. The statue of God simply continued to stare. This is the end. Certain of his impending doom, Jinwoo saw his death in the eyes that were looking down at him. In that moment, he heard a beautiful and melodious singing coming from behind him. With effort, he turned and looked at its source. The statue that he was resting on was now singing with a holy voice, its sound echoing throughout the temple. Looking back, Jinwoo saw the statue of God's face starting to relax. The traces of its demonic rage disappeared as the statue's face returned to its original emotionless visage. As the statue's music ended, the statue of God turned and returned to its seat, appearing as if nothing had happened. Boom! The sound of the giant sitting down rang throughout the temple. Are we safe? Jinwoo faintly smiled through his heavy breaths. Juhee quickly ran to him. Jinwoo, having reached him after running with all her might, Juhee collapsed next to him in tears. Oh my god. Oh my god. She used all the mana at her disposal and tried every healing magic she knew. But it had no effect. One by one, the scattered hunters gathered before Jinwoo, their expressions equally dark. Oh no, Jinwoo. Amidst their pitying looks and words, Juhee cried without ceasing. Why are they looking at me like that? Jinwoo wanted to ask, but he lacked the energy to speak. So, he tried to gather his strength and stand up. A pool of blood had gathered where he was sitting. Jinwoo finally was able to understand the situation he was in. His right leg had disappeared below the knees. He looked across the room to the statue holding a shield. The base of the shield was covered in blood, his missing leg below it. He turned and saw blood dripping down from Juhi's nose. Her body had reached its limits. A B-rank hunter's healing was insufficient for the regeneration of a body part. Yet she continued, her efforts like collecting water with a broken pitcher. And as she continued, both her mana and vitality quickly decreased. It's okay, Juhi. You can stop now. No, I can heal this. I'll heal you. The hunters watched the pair with pity. Of the 17 that had entered, only 6 remained. Of the 6 remaining, 2 had received a seriously injury. Mr. Song and his arm, and now Jinwoo with his leg. Although their lives were saved, no one could put on a smile. Suddenly, a thundering noise rang throughout the temple. At its center, the ground with the magic circle inscribed upon it started rising, forming a platform. Jinwoo realized the final trial had arrived. Prove your faith. He had already been contemplating its meaning. The rising ground stopped at waist height. An altar. Jinwoo absent-mindedly spoke to himself. An altar? Did he just say an altar? The man who had saved their lives not once but twice. Jinwoo was not a high-leveled awakened being, but a lowly E-rank hunter that they looked down on in the past. If it wasn't for Mr. Sung, we would be. The hunter's thoughts were in union. Jinwoo's words up until now were a lifeline to them. And now this man had uttered the words, altar. The quick-witted Mr. Kim was the first to speak. I think I understand. He unsheathed the sword at his waist. Normally a weapon to be used in slaying magic beasts, its purpose this time was different. Even an idiot like me can understand what you mean by altar. The hunters looked at Mr. Kim's drawn sword, gleaming with sharpness, and gulped. Hey, Mr. Kim, why are you taking that out now? Let's talk about this. Talk. Mr. Song's C rank was the highest in the party. With him out of commission, there was no one else in the party would could match Mr. Kim, whose skill shone even amongst the other D-rankers. Mr. Kim pointed his sword at the altar. The last commandment was, prove your faith, and now this altar appeared in the middle of the room. Mr. Kim's gaze shifted to Jinwoo. We have to sacrifice someone at the altar, right, Mr. Sung? Jinwoo nodded. It was his guess as well. One of the living 6 had to become a sacrifice. That's probably the last rule. As he raised his head, he saw Mr. Kim approaching him with a strange look in his eyes. A streak of sweat fell down the side of Jinwoo's head. What are you going to? Just sit there quietly. Mr. Kim pointed his sword at Mr. Song, who had been sitting next to Jinwoo looking over his injuries. Who is the one who dragged us all here? It's Mr. Song right here. Then shouldn't he be the one to pay the price for all this? Jinwoo yelled and tried to get up, but Mr. Song's hands stopped him. Jinwoo turned and looked at the man. Mr. Song shook his head without a word. His eyes begged Jinwoo to stay quiet. Jinwoo wanted to say something, but swallowed his words. Mr. Song slowly got up. Mr. Kim is right. I have to take responsibility. Then we're in agreement, old man. Mr. Kim gestured towards the altar with his sword. If you're in, then let's hurry up. 11 people died because of you. One of the casualties included Mr. Park, Mr. Kim's friend. Of course, the party had voted on the issue before entering the double dungeon, with a stipulation that no one would argue the result. But to Mr. Kim, who had lost all reason, it was but a faded memory in the back of his mind. I'll go of my own will, so could you put away the sword? Mr. Song asked Mr. Kim. How could I trust you after all this? Stop talking and walk. Sighing, Mr. Song walked to the altar, followed by Mr. Kim and his sword pointed at his back. As he watched, Jinwoo bit his lips. It's not Mr. Song's fault. After all, they all had voted and agreed on the result. To Jinwoo, after everything they went through, putting all the blame on Mr. Song was the height of cowardice. But Jinwoo simply did not have the power to stop Mr. Kim. A D-ranker who stood at the height of his rank, and an E-ranker who groveled at the lowest of his. The difference in power was too much. On top of that, he was missing one of his legs. If he tried something now, not only him, but Juhi, who was healing him, could become the target of Mr. Kim's anger. Shit. Jinwoo closed his eyes. Out of all the days, he cursed his powerlessness the most in this moment. In the meantime, Mr. Song had gotten on top of the altar. Whoosh. In response, a red flame appeared at the edges of the middle area where the altar was. All those gathered gulped as they cautiously prepared for what would happen next. But nothing happened, except for the appearance of the flame. As no new development occurred after some time, Mr. Kim and the others started feeling anxious. Hey, Mr. Sung, wasn't this it? Mr. Kim asked Jinwoo. I'm not sure. Jinwoo had expected the third commandment to be fulfilled when a person went on top of the altar. Was it not asking for a sacrifice? Well, it was not a bad news to Jinwoo. If his theory of sacrifice was wrong, then there was a chance to save Mr. Song. Jinwoo's face brightened. As he struggled to get up, Jinwoo asked the two hunters standing nearby for help. Could you help me get to the altar? Jinwoo, your injury. Juhee also stood up with Jinwoo. Having spent most of her mana, her appearance was pale and weak. Thanks to her help, Jinwoo was at least able to overcome the sense of pain from his injuries. I have to hurry. Juhee's condition. Mr. Kim's anger. The other hunter's terror. He was running out of time. With the other two hunters' assistants, Jinwoo arrived at the altar. Let's go up on the altar. His two helpers were taken back for a moment, but placed their faith in Jinwoo and got on top of the altar. In response, 3 more flames arose from the edge of the middle area. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Jinwoo's eyes widened, same as the number of people on top. Mr. Song, his 2 helpers and himself. The 4 flames flickered around the middle area, outlining a circle. Looking at their placement, we just need 2 more to complete the circle. And so, it appeared that the remaining people would have to come on top of the altar. Do you think someone will come to rescue us if we wait? Jinwoo asked Mr. Song. Mr. Song shook his head. Today marks the 7th day since this gate opened. Before reinforcements arrive, those things will probably move first. For a D-rank gate, they sure left it alone for too long. Well, it's the association, after all. A gate will undergo a full opening after 7 days. It was the job of the hunter to prevent that from happening. To close the gate by slaying the boss in the dungeon. That was the real objective of a raid. Should they fail to do so in time, all the magic beasts within the dungeon obtained the freedom to exit the gate. A dungeon break. Jinwoo looked around him. The statue of God remained in its seat, looking down upon their party from distance. If that thing is allowed to leave here, he could not imagine the destruction that would follow. Of course, their party would be the first to be massacred if the statues in the room gained the freedom to move about. So Jinwoo realized they could not just hold out for help. Jinwoo called out to Juhee and Mr. Kim. Can you two also come up here? Juhee followed his instructions. Even the hesitating Mr. Kim quickly followed suit. 2 more flames appeared, completing the circle. Whoosh. The hunters gasped. Huh? What's happening? As Jinwoo expected, something was happening. It's coming. From the outermost circle of the middle area, small blue flames started appearing. One by one, they flared into existence and formed a circle around the middle area. 34, 35, 36. Jinwoo counted 36 blue flames. The red flames that matched the number of people. The blue flames that number 36. Is there a meaning to their number? In that moment, creak, the door blocking their exit opened without a warning. The hunters flinched in reaction. Every single one of them wanted to run towards the exit. But the memory of the final moments of the singing hunter remained fresh in their minds. And no one made any movements. They did not know what fate would await the first person to leave the altar. As if waiting for an answer, all their gazes fell upon Jinwoo, who closed his mouth in silence. It was too early to make a conclusion, whether or not the opening of the door was a trap, or if it was the dungeon's way of letting them know that they had fulfilled the final commandment. He did not know. As the hunters waited for Jinwoo's directions, noises that carried bad news came from edges of the room. The 6 heads turned in unison, looking around the room. What the hell? They've come closer. They're all just moved. The hunter's breathing quickened. The statues that only responded to humans being nearby suddenly appeared to be few steps closer than before. In that short time, Jinwoo was able to fully ascertain the situation. No, the statues didn't move. It was the pedestals beneath the statues that moved closer. The sliding sound from earlier was the sound of stone pedestals grinding against the floor. They've stopped moving. Mr. Kim wiped away the sweat on his brows. As everyone else's attentions were focused on the statues, Jinwoo looked at the blue flames around them. Disappearing one by one, 3 blue flames had already gone out. Jinwoo raised his head. The sound came from his direction. The statues that faced him had moved closer. Why only me? Was it because he had looked away? Jinwoo closed his eyes to test the theory. What do we do now? With renewed understanding, Jinwoo shouted at the others. Don't look away from the statues. Now that he thought about it, the initial movements of the pedestals were probably caused when everyone looked towards him for guidance earlier. These bastards don't move when we're looking at them. Another blue flame went out, but it did not elicit a response from the statues. Could it be? Without taking his eyes off the statues, Jinwoo carefully raised his arm and looked at his watch. As I thought, the blue flames were disappearing every minute. The blue flames are a timer. Jinwoo surmised that the final commandment's trial was to wait on top of the altar until the 36 blue flames disappeared. As long as each of them covered all the statues, they would be safe. There was a chance no one had to die in this final trial. Jinwoo checked his watch and the blue flames to determine the time remaining. 30 left. They just had to wait for 30 minutes. But Jinwoo had made a mistake. While he was counting the blue flames, he had looked away from the statues, and as such, they started moving toward him again. I can't do this. The man who was positioned across Jinwoo screamed and ran towards the open door. Having startled by the sound of movement coming from behind him, unable to turn around, the man lost all courage and made the decision to run. As he jumped from the altar, one of the red flames disappeared. "No, don't," Jinwoo shouted. But the man who ran with all his might ignored him and safely passed through the open doors. What? Mr. Sung, what just happened? He got out safely. Jinwoo, unable to turn around towards the door, did not know what had happened. Did anything change? The door moved slightly inwards. Is it closing right now? No. It started closing a little after that man went through but isn't moving anymore. Jinwoo remembered the red flame disappearing after the man left the altar. Of course. His heart sank to his stomach. The riddle that plagued his mind atop the altar had finally revealed its answer. What part of this was proving faith to the Lord? The answer had come to him. However, to a man who could only walk with someone else's assistance, it was the worst answer possible. The open door was a trap, a false hope to their eyes. Had the entire party ran towards the exit after seeing the door open, the door would have closed immediately, and the party would have ran towards their massacre. On the contrary, the altar was the safe zone. If they had just waited on top and waited out the blue flames while watching the statues, it would have guaranteed their safety. A false hope they could see versus a promise they could not. This was how one proved their faith to the Lord. It was a test to overcome the temptation of freedom amidst the approaching danger. Here, two variables appeared before their situation. 1. Jinwoo's presence. Instead of running to the open door to their doom, the party stopped to listen to Jinwoo, avoiding a certain death. We got lucky. It was only possible due to the presence of a man who had solved the 2 commandments before and saved their lives, earning their respect and attention in the process. But the second variable was not as favorable. Someone had left their party to safety. How would those that remained behind react to this appearance of hope? The answer was obvious. The man supporting Jinwoo was the second to run out the open doors. Mr. Song quickly reacted and caught the falling Jinwoo. Another red flame went out with the second runner, and the door inched closer to being shut. Hey. Mr. Kim wagged his finger at the second runner, but the man, like the first, safely passed through the doors. Looking at the number of remaining flames, Jinwoo shouted, "Please don't move. We can't afford to lose anyone else." Front, back, left, right, to cover the 4 cardinal directions, a minimum of 4 people were needed. Jinwoo, Juhee, Mr. Song and Mr. Kim. If even one more person left amongst the remaining 4, a gap would open up in their coverage. "Mr. Sung, what's happening? Please explain," Mr. Kim asked while wiping away the sweat on his forehead. "We just have to wait like this, until all of the blue flames disappear." Jinwoo revealed all that he had surmised. Mr. Kim listened with attention and nodded along. Finishing his explanation, Jinwoo added, "We can all survive this. The rules of this room always opened a path to survival for those that followed it. The last rule should be no different. As long as they believed in each other, everyone could leave without being hurt." This was Jinwoo's conclusion. Mr. Kim's thoughts were different. He asked after hesitating, "Mr. Sung, you might be correct on all this, but isn't there a possibility that the door might just close once the timer ends?" Jinwoo could not answer him. Although his theory was gathered from the multiple trials and the evidence observed so far, it was not 100% guaranteed that he was correct. And Mr. Kim needed an assurance. To him, the certainty of his own survival outweighed the uncertain survival of the entire group. "I'm sorry, I don't think I can do this. I'm sorry." And with that, Mr. Kim stepped off of the altar. Ignoring Jinwoo's voice, he ran towards the door. After taking one last look at the people he left behind, Mr. Kim went through the door and did not come back. Jinwoo clenched and grinded his teeth. Fuck. He had saved their lives. Instead of repaying his actions with kindness and gratitude, they betrayed him. As expected, a hole appeared in their coverage of the statues. The statues inched closer and closer towards the group. After looking at their surroundings, Mr. Song spoke to Jinwoo and Juhee. "You guys should go." It was a voice filled with resignation. Jinwoo turned his head and looked at the man. "Mr. Kim was right. Who was it that brought you all here? It's only right that I remain behind. But, if anyone should live, it's you young'uns with your many years of life remaining." Mr. Song smiled. They were words meant to comfort the 2 that would have to leave him behind. Jinwoo nodded in defeat. His heart was heavy, but they were not in a situation where they could argue on who should stay and who should go. "Ms. Juhee, could you please take Jinwoo?" "Okay." But suddenly, Juhee, who was approaching the 2 men, collapsed onto the ground. Struggling to get up, tears filled her eyes. I can't move my legs." Jinwoo and Mr. Song's expressions darkened. She was not in a good state. Her lips had turned blue, and her entire body was spasming lightly. It was the side effect of overusing one's mana to near emptiness, made worse in her exhausted state. Only because she tried to heal my leg. Jinwoo struggled to speak as the guilt weighed heavily upon his heart. But this was not a time to waste away like this. The statues were continuing to move towards the center of the room. Jinwoo pulled away from Mr. Song's arms and collapsed onto the floor of the altar. Mr. Song's eyes widened. "You." Jinwoo spoke to him with a determined look. "Please take Juhee and get out of here. I told you I would remain." "Then who will take Juhee?" Jinwoo wasn't able to walk on his own. It was impossible for him to take Juhee, also incapacitated, to the doors. Of course, there was the option of leaving her behind, but she was someone who had saved his life countless times before, and even her current state was due to spending all her mana in efforts to heal him. He hated the thought of carrying the guilt of leaving such a person behind for the rest of his life. "There's no time. Please go." Mr. Song picked up Juhee with a heavy expression. Juhee cried and shook her head in defiance. "No, we can't. Jinwoo, you can leave, I'll stay behind. I promise to buy you dinner, right?" Jinwoo took out the E-rank magic core from his pocket and placed it in Juhee's hand. "Go ahead first and eat with this. I'll come collect the change later." Juhee flared at his smile. "How could you even joke in a time like this?" Jinwoo nodded toward Mr. Song, who struck the back of Juhee's neck, knocking her out. Mr. Song carried her over his right shoulder. "I'm sorry. It's my decision, after all." Mr. Song bowed his head toward Jinwoo and stepped down from the altar with Juhee. The statues were quickly nearing the altar. Sitting down, Jinwoo took in a deep breath. Noticing the sword that Mr. Kim had left behind, he reached out and grabbed it. "Now that it's like this, I'm going to take at least one of you with me." Turning around, he saw Mr. Song and Juhee safely make it through the open doors. "Thank God, I'm the only one that'll die now." It was not a sentiment born of some noble self-sacrifice, just a matter of simple calculation. Even if he got out